Every summer since I was a little girl, the highlight of the year was our family retreat to the lakeside cabin. It wasn't just a vacation spot. It was the heart of our family traditions. The place where we roasted marshmallows until our fingers were sticky, where my dad taught me how to fish off the dock, and where my mom insisted on no phones allowed so we could make real memories. That cabin was my childhood, my safe place, my most treasured memories. So when my parents called me over for dinner one Tuesday evening, I was already buzzing with excitement, ready to talk about this year's retreat. I had even gone out of my way to request time off from work early, just so there would be no excuses. But I wasn't ready for the words that left my mother's lips. "Clara, honey," she began, her tone way too casual for what was about to come. "We've been planning this year's trip and, well, we don't think there's going to be enough space for you at the cabin this time." I froze mid-bite, my fork slipping against the plate with a metallic scrape. Not enough space. My brain couldn't even process it. The cabin had 5 bedrooms. Had always been enough for us. "What do you mean, no space?" I asked, trying to laugh it off like it was some kind of twisted joke. Dad cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Well, Julia is bringing Mark this year, her fiancé. And you know how it is, things will be a little tight. We thought it would just be easier if you sat this one out." The air drained from my lungs. My sister's fiancé, a man I barely knew, was being given my spot at the cabin I grew up in. My bed. My summers. And I was just... what? Disposable. I looked at both of them, waiting for the punchline, but they just continued eating, as if they hadn't just dropped a bombshell on me. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly, gripping my water glass so hard my knuckles went white. "You're telling me there's not enough space for your daughter, but plenty of space for Julia's fiancé, who's known this family for all of 5 minutes?" "Clara," Mom sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Don't make this difficult. Julia is starting her life. This retreat will be important for her and Mark to feel included. You're young, you'll have other chances." Other chances. My stomach twisted with anger. They weren't just excluding me. They were replacing me. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was the dismissive way they said them, as though I should simply accept it. Like it was natural for me to be pushed aside. That night, I lay awake replaying every summer memory, every family moment, every little sacrifice I had made to feel like I belonged. And now, it was all being stolen from me, handed over like a gift to my sister's fiancé. My parents thought I would just nod, smile, and stay behind. But as I stared at the ceiling, a cold determination spread through me. They wanted me out of the picture. Fine. But they were about to learn something they'd clearly forgotten. When you push someone out, you don't erase them. You create someone with nothing left to lose. And I had no intention of sitting quietly while they enjoyed my cabin. The days after that dinner crawled by like a slow, mocking countdown. Every time I looked at my phone, I saw group messages from the family chat blowing up with pictures of preparations for the retreat. Julia had taken it upon herself to lead the conversation, of course. "Mark and I will bring the wine." Wine glass, one text read. "Do we need more towels for the guest bathroom?" Another said. Guest bathroom. The words burned. That was supposed to be my room. The one I had decorated with seashells as a kid. The one where Dad used to tuck me in after fishing trips. Now it was being labeled theirs. I stayed silent in the chat, just watching. Nobody asked why I wasn't contributing. Nobody wondered why I didn't sound excited. My absence didn't matter to them. By the 3rd day, Julia finally called me. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Clara," she squealed, her voice too sweet, dripping with condescension. "I wanted to check in. I hope you're not upset about the whole space issue. You understand, right?" I bit down on my lip, gripping the phone tighter. Understand what? That my own family decided I wasn't worth a bed in a house I grew up in. "Oh, don't be dramatic," Julia chuckled. "You're single, Clara. You don't need the cabin as much as I do. Mark and I are planning our future together, and we need to feel included as a couple. You'll get it one day when it's your turn." Her words were like poison. Single. Don't need the cabin as much. Your turn. It was as if my worth in this family had been reduced to whether or not I had someone at my side. I forced my voice to stay calm. So, you're saying being single makes me expendable? Not expendable, she purred. Just flexible. That word hit harder than I expected. Flexible. Bendable. Something to be moved aside so she could have her spotlight. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were trembling with rage. Julia wasn't just taking my space. She was enjoying the power that came with pushing me out. That night, I sat in front of my laptop, scrolling through old photos of the cabin. Each picture was a reminder. Me standing proudly with my first catch, Dad teaching me how to skip stones, Mom hugging me by the fireplace. The cabin wasn't just a place. It was my inheritance of memories, my right. And they thought they could strip it away because Julia had a shiny fiancé and I didn't. Whoa. As I scrolled, I paused on a picture of the living room. My eyes narrowed. I remembered something Dad had told me when I was younger. One of those random pieces of knowledge you think you'll never need. The cabin wasn't fully owned by my parents. It was co-owned, half by Dad, half by Uncle Richard. And Uncle Richard? Well, let's just say he never liked Julia. The corners of my lips curled into a smile. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a spark of control. If they thought I was going to stay home, silent and forgotten, they were wrong. I wasn't going to beg for space. I was going to take it back. The next morning, I woke up with that half-formed thought still buzzing in my head. Uncle Richard. Most people in the family saw him as distant, even cold. He never married, never had kids, and spent most of his time traveling for business. But I remembered him differently. When I was little, he was the one who snuck me extra marshmallows at the bonfire, who whispered to me during Julia's piano recitals, "Your sister's good, but you're sharper." He saw me. And if I remembered correctly, he still held half the deed to the cabin. I pulled out my laptop again and began digging through old files, emails, anything I had that mentioned the cabin. After a frustrating hour, I found it. A scanned copy of the original purchase agreement. My dad and Uncle Richard had gone in on it together, 50-50. Which meant this. My parents didn't have full control. They couldn't just decide who stayed and who didn't. I felt a thrill of possibility surge through me. If Richard still had equal ownership, he could override their not enough space excuse. The problem? Uncle Richard hadn't been around for years. The family barely heard from him, and when they did, it was usually a postcard from some faraway country. I stared at his email address, wondering if it even worked anymore, then typed. Subject: Cabin question. Uncle Richard. I hope this finds you well. I know we don't talk much, but I really need to ask you something important about the cabin. Mom and Dad say there isn't space for me at the retreat this year. But wasn't it always partly yours? Do you still have a say in who stays? Lara. I hesitated before hitting send, my heart pounding. This could blow up in my face. If Mom or Dad found out I'd gone behind their backs, the fallout would be nuclear. But I had no choice. An hour later, my inbox pinged. I almost dropped my coffee when I saw the sender. Richard Matthews. Clara. Good to hear from you. Yes, I still own 50% of the cabin. Why are they telling you there isn't space? That doesn't sound like the arrangement your father and I agreed to. Call me. My hands shook as I dialed his number. The line rang once. Then his familiar, gravelly voice came through. Clara. What's going on? I spilled everything. The dinner, Julia's smugness, my parents' excuses. Richard didn't interrupt once, but I could hear his breathing getting heavier. When I finished, there was silence. Then he said, low and firm, that cabin was meant for both sides of the family. Your father doesn't get to treat you like an outsider. I'll make sure of it. A weight lifted from my chest, but before I could thank him, he added, Clara, I've suspected for a while your parents and Julia were using the cabin more for themselves than they should. You've given me the proof I needed. If they want a fight, they're going to get one. My pulse quickened. Fight. Wait. Uncle Richard, what do you mean? You'll see, he said simply. Just pack your things. You're going to the retreat. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, a strange mix of relief and dread coursing through me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this. But if Uncle Richard was serious, this wasn't just about me having a bed anymore. This was about something bigger. And Julia, smug, controlling Julia, had no idea what was coming. The drive up to the mountains had always been a tradition. Normally, Julia and I would sit in the back seat, squabbling over snacks, while Mom hummed along to the radio and Dad focused on the winding road. But this year was different. This year I wasn't in their car. Instead, I sat in the passenger seat of a rental SUV beside Uncle Richard. His presence filled the car in a way that was both reassuring and unnerving. He had agreed to meet me in town, insisting we drive up together. "Your father won't like this," he said as we passed the familiar sign that read, Lake Haven Family Retreat. Private property. "I know," I murmured, gripping my bag tightly. He smirked. "Good. Let him be uncomfortable for once." The cabin loomed into view soon after, larger and more polished than I remembered. Julia had clearly overseen renovations. Fresh paint, modern patio furniture, even a glittering set of string lights wrapping around the porch. It looked less like a family retreat and more like a boutique Airbnb. Cars lined the driveway. The entire extended family was already there, laughter spilling from the porch as cousins chased each other across the lawn. And then I saw her, Julia, standing at the center like a queen holding court. My parents flanked her, smiling like proud attendants. The second Julia spotted me stepping out of Richard's SUV, her smile froze. "Clara!" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A cousin whispered, "I thought she wasn't coming." Mom appeared next to Julia, her face tightening. "Clara, honey, what are you doing here?" Richard slammed the car door shut and strode forward, his voice carrying over the gathering. "She's here because she belongs here. This cabin is just as much hers as anyone else's." The air seemed to thicken. My father stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "Richard, this isn't the time for—" "Don't," Richard cut him off sharply. "Don't act like I don't know what's been happening. You told Clara there wasn't space. In a 5-bedroom cabin." His eyes swept over the crowd, daring anyone to challenge him. "That's not how this works. I still own half this place, and I say she stays." A stunned silence followed. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the stares of my relatives burning into me. Julia's face twisted into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course Clara can stay," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It was just a misunderstanding." Richard chuckled darkly. "Funny how those misunderstandings always seem to work in your favor." My father's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Richard turned to me then, his expression softening. "Go on, Clara. Pick your room." The weight of the moment hit me. For the first time in years, someone in this family had stood up for me. Publicly, undeniably. I walked past Julia, who narrowed her eyes at me, her whisper sharp and venomous. "This isn't over." Upstairs, I chose a room with a view of the lake, my favorite spot as a kid. I sat on the bed, trying to steady my breathing, when I overheard raised voices drifting from the porch below. "Richard and my parents. You've been cutting me out, making decisions without me," Richard thundered. "If you want to test me, go ahead, but don't think I won't take this to court." My mother's voice tight and cold. "Richard, don't be dramatic. This is a family matter." "Exactly," Richard snapped. "Which is why Clara has every right to be here. And if you keep treating her like a stranger, I'll start asking questions you don't want answered." Froze. Questions they don't want answered. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer to the window. What was he talking about? Julia's laugh floated up, forced and brittle. "Uncle Richard, you're making it sound like there's some big secret." But Richard didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Something was happening, something bigger than just me being excluded. For the first time, I realized this wasn't only about space. There were deeper cracks in this family, and Uncle Richard knew where they ran. And judging by the look on Julia's face when she caught me peeking from the window, she knew I was about to find out too. That night, the retreat didn't feel like the cozy family getaway I remembered. The air was charged with unspoken tension. Laughter around the dinner table felt forced, conversations clipped. Julia sat in the seat of honor at the head of the table, where my mother usually sat. Her smile tight as though it were painted on. I pushed my food around my plate, the words from earlier replaying in my head. I'll start asking questions you don't want answered. After dinner, when most of the cousins had scattered off to the game room and my parents busied themselves in the kitchen, Richard slipped me a folded envelope beneath the table. "Read it later," he whispered. His eyes lingered on mine, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Warning, maybe even pity. I tucked it into my pocket, my palms sweating. Later that night, I locked my bedroom door and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a thin stack of photocopied documents. At the top of the first page, property deed, Lake Haven Family Retreat. My breath caught. I scanned the lines, heart pounding. According to the document, the cabin had originally been purchased jointly between my father and Richard years ago. But 2 years ago, right around the time I started noticing my parents and Julia taking more exclusive trips, there was a suspicious amendment. Richard's ownership share had been quietly reduced from 50% to 20%. But the signature, it didn't look right. Richard's name was scrawled across the page, but the handwriting didn't match the birthday cards and letters he'd written me for years. Even my untrained eyes could see it. It was a forgery. I flipped through the rest of the pages, each one more damning than the last. Financial statements showing money being funneled into renovations, legal correspondence that seemed cherry-picked to exclude Richard from decision-making. My stomach twisted. My parents had been lying. The next morning I found Richard on the porch, coffee mug in hand, staring out at the lake. "You read it," he said, not turning to face me. He nodded. "They forged your signature." His jaw tightened. "Yes, they tried to cut me out. And Julia, your sister, she's been right there with them. Helping them. Benefiting from it." I sank onto the bench beside him. "But why? Why not just tell me?" "Because you deserve to see it with your own eyes," he said softly. "If I had just told you, maybe you would have doubted me. But now, you know the truth." My chest tightened. I thought about the way my parents looked at Julia, with pride, with indulgence. And the way they looked at me, like an inconvenience. Like not enough space had ever been about me as a person, not a bed in the cabin. "They wanted you gone," Richard continued, his voice low and heavy. "Because if you're out of the picture, Julia becomes the heir to everything. The retreat, the land, even your parents' accounts. They've been grooming her for it." I stared at him, the reality slamming into me like cold water. All those years of me being pushed aside, dismissed, excluded. It wasn't just favoritism. It was strategy. And suddenly, I remembered Julia's whisper the night before. "This isn't over." No, it wasn't. That afternoon, while Julia paraded around the cabin hosting a family activity, I cornered her in the upstairs hallway. "You forged Uncle Richard's signature." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Careful, Clara. Throwing around accusations like that could make you sound paranoid." I stepped closer. "I saw the documents. I know what you did." For the first time her smile slipped. She leaned in, her voice a hiss. "You don't understand, Clara. This place isn't just a cabin. It's power. It's security. And you," she jabbed a manicured finger at my chest. "You were never meant to have it." The word stung, but instead of shrinking, I straightened my shoulders. "We'll see about that," I said. Her face darkened, and for a moment I saw the mask drop, the raw, ruthless ambition behind her practiced charm. As I walked away, my pulse racing, I knew one thing for certain. Julia wasn't just my sister anymore. She was my rival. And if Richard was right, this retreat was about to become a battleground. The next morning the retreat felt different. My parents moved about as though nothing were wrong, cheerfully setting up breakfast, chatting with relatives, and praising Julia for organizing another family hike. But beneath their smiles, I saw it now. The calculation, the subtle glances exchanged between them and my sister. They thought they had won. But I wasn't the same Clara who had arrived here, hurt and confused. I was armed with the truth, and Richard's quiet determination beside me. After breakfast, Richard pulled me aside. "It's time," he said simply. His tone was calm, but I caught the flicker of fire in his eyes. We retreated to his old study in the cabin, the one filled with dusty maps and boxes of family photos. There, spread across the desk, were the documents he'd given me, along with a new folder. "What's this?" I asked. Richard slid it toward me. "The originals. I had a lawyer friend run a forensic analysis. The forgery is undeniable." My breath hitched as I skimmed the reports. Mismatched handwriting samples, timestamps that didn't align, notarizations that had been tampered with. It was airtight. "We could go straight to the authorities," I whispered. "And we will," Richard said. "But first we let them show themselves. We give them a chance to dig their own graves. You in?" I nodded without hesitation. That afternoon, while Julia busied herself with her curated family bonding session, I quietly began setting the stage. I told my cousins and aunts that Richard wanted to share a few words that evening in the great room. Just a casual family toast. They agreed without question. No one suspected the storm about to break. Meanwhile, Richard called Julia over for a private chat on the porch, loud enough that I could overhear. "You've been working hard to keep the retreat running," he said. His voice warm, even admiring. "I just want to make sure everything is in order for the next generation." Julia preened under the praise. "Don't worry, Uncle Richard. Mom, Dad, and I have it under control." "Good," Richard said, pausing just long enough. "Because tonight, I'd like the family to hear about it." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Of course," she said lightly. "It'll be good for everyone to know where things stand." When she walked away, Richard met my gaze through the window. "She's going to walk right into it," his eyes seemed to say. That evening, the family gathered in the great room. The fire crackled, wine glasses clinked, and Julia stood at the center, radiant in her self-appointed role as hostess. My parents flanked her, beaming with pride. Richard rose, clearing his throat. "Family," he began, "I want to take a moment to talk about what this retreat means to us all. Generations of memories. A place we can trust together. But lately..." He let his voice harden, just enough to draw curiosity. "Lately, trust has been broken." The room shifted. Conversations died. My mother stiffened, Julia's eyes narrowed, and my father's fork froze mid-air. Richard gestured toward me. "Clara has something she'd like to share." My pulse hammered as I stood. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the photocopied deed and placed it on the coffee table where everyone could see. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the proof that someone forged Uncle Richard's signature. Someone who wanted him cut out of his own home. And if you look closely, you'll see exactly when, and exactly who, benefited." Gasps rippled through the room. My cousins craned forward. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. Julia laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Really, Clara? Conspiracy theories now. You've always been jealous." "Then explain this," Richard interrupted, tossing down the forensic analysis. "Verified by an independent lawyer. You didn't just steal from me. You lied to the entire family." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents' faces drained of color. Julia opened her mouth, then shut it again, her composure cracking. Finally my father spoke, his voice low and cold. "This isn't the place for this discussion." But Richard's reply was sharper. "Oh, I think it's the perfect place. Because they all deserve to know who they're trusting." I looked around the room, at the faces of cousins and aunts who had once idolized Julia. For the first time, doubt was spreading. The power she had wielded so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. And in that moment I realized. The trap had been set. Tomorrow, when the documents reached the authorities, there would be no denying it. But tonight, the cracks in Julia's empire had finally begun to show. And I wasn't going to stop until it all came crashing down. The morning after the great room confrontation, silence hung heavy over the retreat. My parents avoided my eyes. Julia stayed locked in her room, and whispers rippled through the family like wildfire. The unshakable image of Julia as the perfect daughter had cracked, and everyone knew it. But I wasn't done. Richard and I drove into town at sunrise, the folder of documents secured in his briefcase. The lawyer he'd called the night before was already waiting at the courthouse. Within hours, the papers were filed: fraud, forgery, and illegal transfer of property. By evening, word had spread back to the retreat. Julia burst into the living room where I was quietly reading. Her face flushed with rage. "You think you've won," she spat. "This is our family, Clara. No outsider's going to believe you over Mom, Dad, and me." Richard appeared in the doorway, calm as ever. "The law doesn't care about your little family charades. The evidence is ironclad." Julia's bravado flickered. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes. 2 weeks later we found ourselves in court. The polished wood panels, the sharp smell of old paper. It all felt surreal. My parents sat on one side, rigid and pale. Julia between them with a lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. Richard and I sat opposite, steady, unyielding. The judge examined the forensic reports, the forged signatures, the notarization inconsistencies. Richard's lawyer spoke with clarity and precision, unraveling every lie Julia and my parents had spun. At one point Julia tried to object. "This is all a misunderstanding. Uncle Richard gave us permission." But the judge cut her off sharply. "Then why does this expert analysis prove otherwise?" The courtroom murmured. Julia's face crumbled, her confidence evaporating under the weight of the truth. When the verdict finally came, it landed like thunder. The retreat, along with all rights and ownership, was restored to Richard. The fraudulent documents were voided. Julia and my parents faced heavy fines and the looming shadow of criminal charges. I glanced at my parents, expecting perhaps anger or maybe regret. But all I saw was hollow silence. Two people who had gambled everything on favoritism and greed and lost. Julia, however, couldn't accept it. As the judge dismissed the court, she rounded on me in fury. "This is your fault, Clara. You've always wanted to ruin me." I met her glare with calm resolve. "No, Julia. You ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light." For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. That evening, Richard and I drove back to the retreat, not as guests but as rightful heirs to its legacy. The family members who had once dismissed me now looked at me differently, with respect, even gratitude. Later, standing on the balcony overlooking the lake, Richard turned to me. "You fought for the truth, Clara. You saved more than just this place. You saved the integrity of our family name." I smiled faintly, the cool night air filling my lungs. "And you gave me the courage to do it." Below us, the cabin lights glowed warmly against the dark forest. For the first time, the retreat didn't feel like a place I was excluded from. Felt like home. Julia and my parents had tried to erase me, to make me believe there wasn't enough space for me here. But in the end I carved my own space. Stronger, brighter, undeniable. And this time no one could take it away.